I am Nathan Hobble. I serve here at DBHDS as the Director of Behavioral Services and Projects. I am very excited to introduce my colleagues, Courtney Pernick, John Tolson, and Nick Vanderberg, who will be providing this behavioral science perspective on feedback and supervision. So without any further ado, I will go ahead and turn it over to them.
Great. Thank you, Nathan, for that introduction. Like I said, my name's Nick, and welcome to another continuing education event presented by DBHDS. Beyond Good Job, leveraging the principles of behavior for effective feedback. So performance feedback is one of the most commonly used interventions to sustain and improve performance. And in this training, we're going to talk about the science behind effective feedback, how to make feedback more meaningful, and some tips when navigating some of those difficult conversations that we have to have as supervisors. If you have any questions throughout this training, go ahead and put those in the chat, and we'll get to those if we have some time at the end. There will be a few opportunities for you to share some of your personal experiences with providing feedback. We're going to be using an online survey polling tool to get those experiences from you, so we encourage you to participate when that opportunity comes around. And we're going to wrap up today's training with a short activity. We're going to watch a couple videos that you may recognize and see if the leaders in those videos are following the techniques that we're going to suggest during this training. So some learning goals for today. So after today, you're going to be able to identify some of the pitfalls of not using the behavior analytic approach to increasing employee performance. We're going to talk about some of the functions of feedback and some of the principles of behavior at play when providing it. We're going to talk about how to build rapport with the people you work with. We're going to define feedback and talk about some of its key elements when providing positive feedback and corrective feedback. And we're going to talk about something called the negative feedback loop and how that can shape future behavior. And we're also going to touch on how you should be willing to receive feedback from the people that work for you, because feedback should be a two-way street when it's done correctly. All right, but let's start out by gauging some of your personal experiences with being trained to provide feedback. So if you are currently in a supervisory role or ever been in one, do you feel that you are adequately trained to provide feedback when you enter that role? If you've never been a supervisor, it's okay. Just respond with your general experience with providing feedback. You can access this poll by clicking on the link in the chat, or I believe you can even just click on the link directly from Teams, what you're seeing on the slide, or you can scan the QR code with your phone. You can access it. Just be sure to accept cookies. I don't know what a cookie is, but I've been told you have to accept it for it to work, so please accept it. All right, so let's see.
Coming through.
How your experience is with feedback. Oh, we're getting a bunch. That's great. Okay, so a nice spread here. Results still coming in. Right now we have about 15% strongly agree that you were trained how to provide feedback when you first stepped in. That's great. 35 agree, so that's a good little chunk. But 40% disagree and 5% strongly agree. It looks like 5% of us were definitely just thrown in the water, sink or swim. I think I can empathize with that. I was definitely thrown in when I first stepped into a leadership role. All right, so that's interesting. So most of us, about half of us, were not trained on how to provide feedback when we stepped into that role, which seems odd given that, well, let me pull these slides up real quick. You know, it seems odd because I think we can all agree feedback is a vital skill for supervisors, right? But many of us weren't trained how to do it. Feedback is a supervisor's most direct tool to shape employee performance and engagement. When it's done well, feedback can help reinforce effective behaviors, and it can create a culture of continuous improvement. And the principles of behavior and technologies derived from behavioral science can be and should be applied when providing feedback in the workplace. Hopefully after today's training, you're going to have a deeper understanding of how to leverage these principles of behavior when providing feedback and use it to create a more positive and productive work environment for your team. I think most of us could empathize with having a supervisor that gave pretty terrible feedback and didn't really make much effort to build rapport. It can really change how you feel about your work. Let's take a look at a nationwide poll to see what may happen when supervisors are not skilled at building rapport and providing feedback. So this is a poll conducted over the last 5 years by the Gallup poll, and they looked at the main reasons why people left their job. Some of those reasons were because of pay, personal reasons, maybe relocations, or there's other opportunities elsewhere. But year after year on this 5-year poll, we can see that an employee's direct supervisor or manager remained one of the top reasons why people left a position. This may suggest that those supervisors were probably not using best practices when it came to providing feedback and weren't taking the time it takes to build a meaningful relationship with their employees. So this poll is helpful. It can give us some insight on what's going on with feedback in the workplace, but polls do have their limitations. So let's look at what the behavior analytic research has found on the subject. All right, so Hess and colleagues did this really helpful review of feedback in the literature on their paper on enhancing supervisory relationships with ACT training. Really interesting article. Encourage you to check that out if you haven't seen it. But in their lit review, they found that feedback was an essential component for supervisory leadership to be effective. And it should involve that positive reinforcement and corrective feedback, both of which we're going to talk about in this training. They also found that feedback is often identified as a critical and important component when providing training, and that feedback is valued and causes supervisees to seek out feedback as a defining feature of an effective supervisory relationship. So we can see that the literature supports feedback as an essential part of a supervisor's job. Let's look at what our codes of ethics has to say about providing feedback. So looking at the BACB and Positive Behavior Supports Facilitators Code of Ethics, we can see both of these have an emphasis on providing effective supervision and training as a supervisee or mentor. So the BACB Code of Ethics, it says that behavior analysts have a responsibility to monitor performance and provide praise and corrective feedback. And that behaviorists actively engage in continual evaluation of their own supervisory practices using the feedback they get from other people. Looking at the Positive Behavior Support Facilitator Code of Ethics, it says that training should include ongoing feedback about performance throughout the training program. And it can even include individual feedback sessions when the training participants have specific concerns. So the Code of Ethics, large employee polls, and the literature are all telling us that providing effective feedback is vital for the role of supervisor. But why were half of us not well trained on how to give effective feedback? Well, if you ask the late great OBM guru Aubrey Daniels, he would say that the simple answer is that most people do not have exposure to behavior analysis. So though this may not be the case for every higher education program, many business schools and other related fields, they typically don't teach the use of behavioral psychology to address all the practical challenges that supervisors face in the workplace. And if the economic health of an organization is good, they may not seem a reason to change anything, right? If the money's coming in, why would we change it? But there are many examples in the news of top executives who get paid a bunch of money and they don't really produce the value for their company or organization. They can always ride that golden parachute safely to the ground. They don't have to pick up these techniques. Another reason may be that if a supervisor yells and screams, they get what they want. And then this behavior is likely to continue. It's accessing some sort of reinforcement. But negative reinforcement and punishment will change performance by definition. But the results are fleeting and can have negative consequences that we saw in the previous polls, indicating that people left their jobs often because they didn't like their boss. And even people with knowledge of the science of behavior may sometimes be at fault for not practicing what they preach in their supervisory role. We're not immune to this. I know certainly I'm not immune to this. Even though we understand the principles of behavior, we sometimes don't apply those skills and that knowledge in our role as supervisors. So let's look at some of those principles so we can be sure to better apply them when we provide feedback. And it can be difficult to understand the function of feedback. Sometimes it's an antecedent, sometimes it's a consequence, sometimes it's both at the same time. But feedback is always a stimulus, which makes sense because as we know as behaviorists, a stimulus can take on many functions, sometimes multiple functions at once. It all depends on the context and a person's own unique learning history. A stimulus for one person might function as a reinforcer, and the same stimulus might function as a punisher for another. One person's SD might be another's SDP, and so on and so on. And trying to put feedback in a single function box would be pointless. It can't be done. But we're going to look at some of the functional roles feedback can fill as identified by Johnson and colleagues in 2023. They identified feedback as filling the role of basic functions based on pair, descriptive stimuli, and motivating operations. All right. So starting with feedback acting as a respondent conditioned stimulus, this is, as a quick reminder, this is when a previously neutral stimulus through association with an unconditioned stimulus comes to elicit some sort of respondent or reflexive response. Hopefully that rings a bell. So when supervisors provide feedback, they often or they may use emotionally charged words like excellent or failure, which may start as neutral. None of us are born with the ability of these words to elicit some sort of response. But after repeated pairings with emotional experiences like praise, rewards, or punishment, these words can become respondent conditioned stimuli that will elicit positive or negative reactions. And these negative reactions can take the form of physiological responses that feel like anxiety or shame. And when providing feedback, supervisors should consider this emotional learning history likely experienced by the people receiving it, as it may unintentionally influence performance for the worse. So, for example, you just saw one of your team members really mishandle a situation with an upset family member in your clinic. The situation spiraled out of control. The family stormed out, said they were never coming back. Afterwards, you provide some feedback to that team member. You lose your temper a little bit, and you use some of these conditioned words. Maybe you say something like, that was a complete failure. I never want to see you do that again. All right, and this feedback elicits those conditioned responses that can be tacted as fear and shame. So the team member goes on to fumble the very next family interaction because they were just so upset about the feedback, which this situation was certainly counterproductive, right? You try to improve performance, but you actually made it worse. So being aware of feedback's ability to act as a respondent conditioned stimulus can help a supervisor avoid situations like this. So in addition to a respondent relationship, feedback may also serve as a conditioned reinforcer or a conditioned punisher. We all grow up being told when we're doing something well or doing something wrong, and these statements are typical cultural reinforcers and punishers. So given this learning history, a supervisor's feedback will likely have some behavior altering effects on performance as soon as a new employee walks in the door. But when supervisor feedback is reliably paired with other reinforcers with the organization, maybe your feedback is paired with some extra time off or a bonus, additional conditioning will occur so that the non-spoken gestures and mannerisms of the supervisor can act as effective reinforcement. So this pairing effect is helpful because it allows for a simple thumbs up from a supervisor to act as a quick and free reinforcer in the moment. But only if that supervisor has a nice long history of being paired with other reinforcement. Because you can imagine if you got a thumbs up from some random guy on the street, it's not going to act as a reinforcer. That's pretty creepy, right? Because that pairing history isn't there. You need that pairing history for it to work. Right? And feedback may also serve the role of discriminative stimuli. So for instance, let's say you just set up a new performance monitoring system with your team. You're going to be checking in with them once a week to making sure they're hitting certain goals. This is going to let your team know that you're going to keep a close eye on their performance, establishing an SD if it is associated with the availability of reinforcement for performance, signaling that their efforts to engage in these valid behaviors will be rewarded, which according to what we know about SDs is going to have a vocative effect on those behaviors we want to see more of. And on the other hand, this same performance monitoring system may signal the availability of punishment for undesired behaviors, abating those behaviors and acting as an SDP for poor performance. And feedback may be correlated with the absence of consequences, those deltas. So if your feedback is unspecific or just plain wrong, it shows your team you aren't really paying attention to how they're performing and you don't really know what's going on. This will be an S delta, letting them know, signaling the lack of reinforcement for their high performance efforts. This is definitely going to impede any sorts of efforts you make for improvement, because if you don't see them performing well, there's no reinforcement associated with it. And this can be an S delta P as well, signaling the lack of punishment, allowing previous punished behavior to recover. Don't want that either. And lastly, when feedback establishes other events as reinforcing, it takes on the role of condition-motivated operations. So when feedback is associated with some type of worsening of a person's situation, it may serve as a reflexive CMO if the removal of that situation caused by the feedback will function as a reinforcer. That's a little muddy. That's okay. CMOs usually are. But hopefully this example will help clear it up a little bit. So let's say you provide a team member some feedback about their chronic absenteeism. And that feedback session includes some sort of warning that if they miss any more time, that they could be fired. So this threat of unemployment may function as a reflexive CMO and evoke behaviors that will remove the threat of unemployment. So hopefully in this case, that would mean that they would have improved absenteeism. But aversive control like this has been known to backfire because it can also invoke unwanted behaviors as well. So in this case, it may be the employee attempting to hide that they're late or absent, or maybe they might even try to deflect your attention to somebody else on the team who also has a poor attendance record. If you've ever experienced this, you may have experienced this if you've ever given this type of feedback paired with a threat. I know I have. Feedback may also function as a transitive CMO as well if it alters the value of some other stimulus. So for example, let's say a manager provides really helpful, objective feedback to their employees, and this may establish opinions and evaluations as more reinforcing, leading to the employee to seek out appraisals from other people. So just like the classic CMOT example of a locked door making a key a more valuable reinforcer and invoking key-seeking behavior, the manager's helpful feedback sessions made evaluations more reinforcing, evoking evaluation-seeking behaviors, like maybe asking a manager if the project they're working on is on the right track. So if your team is already seeking feedback from you, you may very well have already leveraged CMOTs to your advantage. As the late, great Aubrey Daniels would say, positive reinforcement is the most powerful interpersonal tool available to people in any relationship. We felt the need to honor Dr. Aubrey Daniels today, who recently passed away. His work in ABA and OBM has impacted countless people across many organizations across the world, including us, the team here. His obituary reads, in Aubrey's honor, we encourage you to learn more about the power of positive reinforcement and start using it today to shape someone's life for the better. So Courtney and John are now going to share with you some practical methods to do just that, starting with Courtney.
Thanks, Nick. All right. So as Nick said, we're going to talk about how to provide those consequences in the form of feedback. But before I get to that, I want to increase the likelihood that those consequences are going to be meaningful. And one way to do that is to build rapport with those you work with, but specifically those you supervise. So rapport is described as creating and sustaining high-quality relationships. Taking time to build rapport is important because when you build rapport, it reduces staff turnover, it creates a positive learning history for conversations, and staff tend to accept feedback positively. Staff also tend to engage in discretionary effort, which is that extra time, energy, enthusiasm that employees put into their work that goes beyond those basic job requirements. Research supports the idea that good rapport in the work setting increases discretionary effort. So I want you to think about the relationships you have with those you supervise or with your supervisor and think, could it be improved? Possibly. So here are some ways to build rapport with your staff. Use welcoming nonverbal communication. So be careful when you're interacting with others to not, stand with your arms crossed or an angry look on your face. During meetings, avoid being on your phone and responding to messages. Engage in small talk. Use their name in conversation. That seems simple, but it's very noticeable if you don't. share personal anecdotes. If you can relate to the situation with a personal story, then that helps build that rapport. Ask open-ended questions and build on previous conversation with follow-up questions. So in a previous job of mine, I had a supervisor who was training me to hold meetings with managers once a month. And while I was observing her do these meetings, I noticed that she was asking follow-up questions about things in their personal lives, like, oh, how was that concert you went to? Or how are your daughter's swim lessons going? And I thought, like, she really knows a lot about these managers and their personal lives. And we met with a lot of managers. And I later learned that during those meetings, if the managers felt it was important enough to share their personal lives with her, she took notes on it. And then she made sure to follow up on that the next month's meeting. And I thought that was pretty cool that, you know, she took time to build rapport that way and use the tool of keeping track so that she could do that. And failing to build rapport could reduce those opportunities for high effective training and high quality feedback. And that's what we're going to talk about next. And as we talk about feedback, it's important to note everyone has their own preferences for how they receive feedback. So while you're building rapport, take time to learn how the people you supervise prefer to receive feedback. So there's been a good amount of research on the importance and benefits of rapport building when providing direct care to individuals with disabilities. Here are a few studies regarding rapport building with caregivers, employees, and staff. So Taylor and colleagues included the importance of having rapport with caregivers in their discussion of providing compassionate and empathetic care and behavior analytic treatment. Herner and colleagues discovered that some negative implications of poor supervisor-employee rapport. They found employees who have poor rapport with their supervisors may be unwilling to approach those supervisors with questions or concerns, and then seek advice from less qualified individuals. And then Curry and colleagues found that when provided with a short period of rapport building prior to completing a task, when compared to a control group, the rapport building group completed more of the productivity task. The rapport building group also chose to complete an optional survey at the end of the task, demonstrating some discretionary effort that I mentioned previously. So literature in this area suggests that building rapport is key in building a positive relationship and improving outcomes. McLaughlin and Carr discovered that demands may be less aversive when coming from someone who has good rapport with the person versus someone who has poor rapport. So they see building rapport as a setting event. So think about the various supervisors you've had. Think about one supervisor maybe that you have a good relationship with, that you liked working with, and then think about one maybe during your career that you maybe did not like so well or didn't have a great relationship with. Now imagine they each have told you that you need to submit your data by the end of the day. So we're all good employees, so you're going to complete the task regardless of the rapport you have with that person, most likely. But is it more aversive coming from that supervisor who you have a poor relationship with? When it comes from the person you have a poor relationship with, do you respond negatively? Maybe you complain about it when they walk away. Maybe you don't put as much effort into doing the task. When it comes from the supervisor you have a good relationship with, do you have a more positive reaction to the demand? Maybe you put a little more effort into making sure the task is completed well, or maybe you even put in a little discretionary effort. Maybe you go above and beyond the expectation. So this just kind of demonstrates that rapport is also important for setting the stage for effective feedback. And we've said feedback a few times. We're going to do this word cloud activity. If you can scan the QR code, it's kind of small on there. The link is also in the chat. Might be able to copy it again. And just type in whatever comes to mind, one word that comes to mind when you hear the word feedback. And it's going to create a word cloud, and the words that are put in the most are going to be the largest. And we're going to kind of see, like, what's your initial reaction when you hear the word feedback? And you can enter as many times as you want. So maybe you have more than one word, and that's okay.
They're all really positive. Nobody's putting crying yet. That's good. Escape, yeah. Got to get out of here. Growth.
This is really cool to watch it change as you all put in your answers. All right, cool. So progress, criticism, support, growth, constructive, change. All right.
All over the place.
Yeah. Wrong, improve, praise, negative, right, critique, help. Okay, cool. Thank you all for doing that.
Got the slides coming back up for you, Courtney.
Yeah. All right. So we had a good mixture of positive reactions and negative reactions to the word feedback. So I think if you have a negative reaction to the word feedback, there's a good chance that the people you're working with also have had a negative experience with feedback. And if you've only had positive experiences with feedback, that's fantastic. But not everybody has, as we can see from the results of that word cloud. So we're going to talk about how we can create a culture where feedback doesn't elicit those negative reactions from people, and we want it to be a positive experience. What is feedback? Feedback contains information about a performance that allows the performer to change their behavior. And when we talk about feedback, we're not just talking about corrective feedback. So we're talking positive feedback and corrective feedback. And both give information about the person's behavior. Feedback is the most used intervention in organizational behavior management literature. Research has shown the right feedback can improve performance as much as 100%, and it's cost effective. Providing staff members with feedback shapes their behavior to improve performance and overall productivity in the workplace. And now think about a time when you had a positive experience with feedback. And so I'm going to ask you to put some responses in the chat and tell me, what was it that made that experience positive? You could go ahead. If you're willing to share, pop it into the chat. If you've had a positive experience with feedback, what was it that made it positive? Honesty. Yes. It was private, so you were not put on blast, okay? Improved performance. Delivered professionally, genuine, the intent of the provider, real-time examples, the approach, genuine care. Ooh. Nice. Thank you all. These are great. They keep coming. Specific. It's coming in faster than I can read. Realistic.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, being supportive in their tone. I love all of the positive experiences you've all had with feedback. This is great. Awesome. Respectful, alignment, eye-opening. Thank you. Thank you all. So I'm going to focus on positive feedback for a bit here. We all know that reinforcement increases behavior. So when it's done correctly, positive feedback should reinforce behavior, which would lead to future desired behavior. It can boost motivation and engagement as well as enhance employee confidence. It can also help create a positive work environment and reduce staff turnover. Some things to keep in mind when providing feedback. The no but rule. when providing specifically positive feedback, the no but rules. So you did a really nice job putting together the presentation, but next time try not to put so many words on the slide. So you want to avoid using the occasion for praise as an opportunity to teach. If your intent is to give positive feedback, then just stick with positive feedback and choose a different time for your opportunity to teach. Be sincere and specific. Tell the person how their behavior impacted you and individualize it based on their performance. And then we found that it's recommended you give some form of individual, informal, positive feedback daily. And then group, written, and public feedback should be provided often. All right, so how we accept feedback, positive feedback specifically, is just as important as how we provide that feedback. So we want to set a good example. If you're the receiver of positive feedback, be graceful about it. So if you say things like, oh, it was nothing, or I'm just doing my job, it may seem like you're deflecting that feedback. So assume that the person giving you positive feedback genuinely wants to recognize something that you did well. Here are some examples of some common ways we might dismiss positive feedback and just some examples of ways to accept that positive feedback. I know I'm definitely guilty of not accepting positive feedback very well. And so, practicing accepting is the slides say compliment, accepting that compliment or that positive feedback. Just a simple thank you is good. I also like on here that just acknowledging I struggle to accept compliments, but thank you. Those responses are way better than dismissing it or changing the focus or even criticizing yourself or apologizing. You want to avoid those things. So providing positive feedback to people who provide you with positive feedback is also important. So remember, we're trying to create that culture where feedback is a positive experience. So let them know that you appreciate that positive feedback, even if it makes you feel socially awkward. Okay, so I've mentioned a few times we want to make feedback a positive experience for people. So Bartle and colleagues identified 5 strategies to help engineer a positive learning history with feedback in general. So if you're giving corrective feedback, describe the steps to correct the mistake in the future, provide a rationale for the feedback, and ask the staff member if they have any questions. A supervisor should not have a sink or swim approach with staff. So demonstrate your role as a supportive resource and praise new staff members for reaching out when they need assistance. Ensure consistent say-do correspondence to showcase effective conversation and foster trust with your staff. Early on, you should check in on how they felt about feedback from you. So something like, was the amount of feedback I provided appropriate, or is there anything I can do to improve my feedback? And then admit your mistakes too. So everyone makes them, and it's okay to show your humanity. And so now John is going to talk more in detail about corrective feedback.
Thank you, Courtney. Appreciate that. All right, so as Nick talked about at the very beginning, a lot of us here didn't demonstrate, or excuse me, were not trained in the ability to provide feedback and to provide it effectively. I know that that was the case for me. It was more of a case of trial and error and holding hands with HR. But we know that without corrective feedback or particular behavior or behaviors in need of improvement may never change. So through the research, we know that corrective feedback has been used across the myriad of vocational responsibilities, and it's been empirically known to improve proficiency in completing tasks, improvement in those soft skills, so like interpersonal relationships and relationships among others, among other things. And all of us need it from time to time. Like, we should not be devoid of feedback. Otherwise, we may not be able to progress in our vocational responsibilities, learn new skills. Everybody should be able to provide feedback, whether it's supervisor to a employee, employee to supervisor, colleague among colleagues, or members out in the community. Maybe members on the community that you provide services to. We really need that feedback. Everybody should be able to provide it. Just like positive feedback, there are a variety of methods to providing corrective feedback, right? Maybe in situ, immediate, could be informal. You see something needs to be corrected right away. Or delayed. You're setting up some formal feedback, right, with talking points. Be individualized, could be feedback to a group, could be mutual, bi-directional, as well as one way. What feedback should not be is demeaning, right? Focusing on attitudes, right? We want to focus on behaviors in need of improvement. Shouldn't be blaming, overly critical. No, the goal is not to be there and hurt somebody. The goal is to help them improve in their performance, right? It should not feel like an attack. So here are some benefits to providing corrective feedback. In some situations, people may find corrective feedback more useful. Let's say particularly if like goals are involved. You have a person that's really motivated to get a promotion, maybe learn a new set of skills. So a person may really want that corrective feedback so they can work towards a goal. If a person continues to make errors on a particular skill or task, it's likely they're going to become frustrated, right? They're not able to do it with proficiency. It's taking a long time. They're not accessing reinforcement. Providing corrective feedback to correct the mistake may lead to more opportunities for the receiver to contact positive reinforcement. Cross that task off their list. In some cases, corrective feedback may be more preferred when initially learning a task, right? We all need more feedback when we're learning something new. Whereas positive feedback may be more preferred with master tasks. It's something that we already have under our belt, right? But we still want that positive feedback to sustain that behavior over time. If a person doesn't receive corrective feedback, the employee may be ignorant of the fact of their unsatisfactory performance. Or if the person does know, they might not care, and just do the bare minimum to get by. We know that without providing feedback, this in turn could lead to diminished productivity and punitive action for their performance. Just like positive feedback, individualize your corrective feedback based on the person's preferences when possible. Though some practitioners do not support the use of the feedback sandwich where there's, corrective feedback sandwiched in between two positive statements, there is some research that suggests some people prefer to receive some positive statements to balance out the corrective feedback when given. You may have employees who just want to be on the Atkins feedback diet, right? They don't want any additional positive feedback carbs in that moment, all right? Just get to the point, give me the meat or the veggie patty for our vegetarian friends out there. Other folks may want, positive statements peppered in. It's good early on in the working relationship to talk to your fellow employees to see what they prefer. All right. Difficult conversations are a type of feedback in which the content is potentially sensitive, right? And be a little uncomfortable to talk about, a little aversive, that requires behavior change from one or both parties in the conversation. But we know that by having difficult conversations and not avoiding them, that we're going to be able to positively impact staff and positively impact the organization that they're working for. So here's a list of difficult conversations. All right, I've had the luxury of having all these. If any of these resonate with you, feel free to pop them in the chat. If there's one here that are missing, pop them in the chat as well. Of course, let's be professional about it. What we got, folks? Anything relatable here?
Definitely had a few of those myself.
All right.
All the above. There you go.
All the above? Okay. All right. Good response. All right. So here are some tips on how to provide feedback. All right. The example here is related to a task that is consistently completed late. All right, start with a positive or empathetic statement. Could be both. I appreciate your dedication to the organization and your compassion to help the individuals we work for. Specify behaviors done correctly. You've done an amazing job providing services, which is represented by your high scores on your fidelity checks. Specify behaviors done incorrectly. I've noticed that over the past month, you have not been submitting your session notes on time and have needed reminders to complete them. Describe how to correct the errors. Please set up a recurring calendar reminder each week for the next quarter. At the end of the week, cross the task off. I'll be reviewing weekly. Ask for questions. Does this make sense? Do you have any questions or concerns? If there are any barriers to meeting this expectation, please let me know. And discuss subsequent supervisor actions. I'll follow up with you next week and see how the change is working out for you and provide further assistance if needed. And then end with a positive or empathetic statement. I know you are capable of this adjustment, and I'm here to support you. Your dedication to our clients is truly valued. Also, it's quite possible, particularly if you have great rapport with a person, which is why it's good to have rapport at the onset of a working relationship, that the individual summarizes their behavior independently. If they do that during the meeting, you have a better chance that information will be better received. A staff member may come to you prior to having to provide feedback and come up with a plan, unsolicited, on how they can improve a particular behavior. Here's some tips for staying out of the loop. If you're in a situation where you're providing feedback and the person becomes defensive, it is quite possible that the person is under a lot of stress, right? Stress at work, maybe stress at home, things outside of the office which are really hard for the person. Stay calm. Don't take it personally. Listen to what they're saying and not how they're saying it. If the person acts surprised, apologize that you did not provide feedback to them earlier. Ask the person to consider self-monitoring their behavior to see if they agree with your assessment and then plan to follow up again. If the person confuses the issue by dragging in unrelated issues, paraphrase what they're saying, make sure they know that you are listening, but cover one issue at a time and arrange another time to speak on those issues. If the person questions your motive, say that you're providing feedback because you care and believe team members should receive feedback to build a stronger team. Ask what you can do in the future to build a more trusting relationship. If the person goes on an emotional attack, deflect the person's emotions and use a calm tone of voice while sticking to the main points. Set up another time to meet if the person continues to be emotional. Plan to evaluate your own motives and think about why the person reacted that way. If the person questions your assessment, be open to the fact that your assessment may not be specific enough. Right? Use I statements to indicate that you are speaking from your own point of view. If appropriate, have others who agree with your assessment speak directly to the receiver. All right, as Courtney mentioned earlier, just as we are givers of feedback, we should also model behaviors of being receivers of feedback. All right, showing that we are being receptive to the feedback that is being provided. So having appropriate conversational skills, right? Good posture, open body language, appropriate facial expression, and let the person say what they have to say. Avoid interrupting them. Make statements of gratitude, showing that you thank them for coming by. It could have taken a lot for this person to come into your office and provide you with feedback. Thank you for reaching back out to remind me to send you that report. I appreciate it. Ask follow-up questions when receiving feedback, particularly if it's vague. Can you explain a little more? Just want to make sure I understand your input on how I can change behavior. Summarize the feedback and paraphrase the information described in the feedback that has been received. It sounds as though I could be more open to ideas that the team is passing along to me. And then plan for behavior change. How are you going to change your behavior in the future? For the next meeting, I'll make sure to open up opportunities for our team to give feedback.
That concludes our training. So thank you for participating. We hope that you're able to take something from this to help you as a supervisor. We hope feedback becomes positive and a positive and useful tool for you and your supervisees. There's tons of resources out there if you're interested in checking out more. Some reading recommendations here on the screen. The Journal of Organizational Behavior Management, Supervisor's Guide book, Bringing Out the Best in People, and then the feedback toolkit from APPA. The members section of their website has that you can download. We'll also be sending out a survey to everyone so that you can provide us with feedback.